Hey, everybody, welcome to Lofty Darwinism. We are back. It's been a little of a break. I was up in New Mexico, which was beautiful in Angel Fire. I just
Mm.
go there all summer. I can't ski because my feet, whatever. I can, but like there's no footwear for me. A number of people are going to pretend they can go find size 18 snowboard or ski boots, and God bless them. I enjoy. I hope that they are right and they can do it. But the closest we found currently is there's a master bootmaker in Austria. So should I want to go get size 18s, I think I would have to go to Austria. As of now, that's my closest option. Darwin, I have been following you talking online a little bit. Let's talk. Let's start with you in your world. You know,
Yeah, okay, so I've been posting, like we live in a, what some people would argue is a post-literate society. People are not reading books as much as they used to, and just generally we are getting our information increasingly like the information that you're getting right now through dialogue, through speaking. And it's the type of thing that just historically, whenever you look at people posting online, I think it's just very easy to say, okay, go have fun,
yeah.
but you know, now I'm trying it. Now I'm just sort of like, trying to post at the way the algorithm wants me to. And it's been really amazing. Like you'd be astonished how many people, you know, remember that you exist and start talking to you. Like it is a very good way of like just reconnecting with my friends.
So, what do you mean by the way the algorithm wants you to? I want to just flesh that out a little bit because I was like, okay, that's interesting for
Well,
me.
okay, so uh, the the algorithm is the name of the game, right? Like that's what made TikTok in particular famous, is that everybody said like they have like a really great algorithm.
Right, right.
And what the algorithm it wants is for you to stay on their platform. Like that's, just not there's nothing crazy about that. But what the algorithm really can't fake is the human content, right? So, yeah, there's AI slop happening, but for the most part, the algorithm doesn't want to feed you AI slop. The algorithm wants to feed you people with whom you will find a connection and continue listening to them. And so, if you give the algorithm what it wants, in theory, it will push your post in front of a bunch of people. Let me give you an example. I posted a video about how much I was sick of Spider-Man
Yeah, I
on
started that, but like
Instagram.
didn't get all the way through it.
Yeah, Instagram was crickets for the most part. TikTok was crickets for the most part, but on YouTube Shorts, that generated some heat.
Yeah, I mean, Darwin, so like this is always the catch, right? Because I've always believed you should really be doing something because you should want to do it. Like the likes are incidental to the decision to do a thing. However, in our modern economy, to some degree, like if no one's responding and you need response to continue your business or your work, then you got to change too. So there's a balance here, right? And For me, I look at it. I'm like, okay, what do I need to post? I think I'm still deeply scarred from the Civil War on Facebook of 2016 through whatever. Like that is just so much pointless to all
Mhm.
the arguments. It didn't help really convince anybody. And so for me, it's like, what will we take from this show? I think and clip out there, going forward and things like
Well,
that.
first of all, I disagree. I actually do think that the pitched battles on social media played a major role in public opinion. It's just that nobody ever admits that they're wrong in front of you.
Oh,
Like
I think it hardened opinions. I think it hardened a lot of opinions. Um, yes, I'm sure somebody changed their mind somewhere about something, or watched a fight and changed their mind, whether they're the opponent or the aggressor. There was change out of it, but it's really hard to say that we are a more cohesive society after that time period, right? And
well, no,
because
of course
arguably,
not.
I mean,
But like
arguably we
what
didn't
here's what
actually
happened.
let us go through it. Like
We
I
had
think
a
they cut it off
shit
maybe too
post.
soon.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, but we had a shit poster in chief, for
Mhm.
throughout 20, like Trump's first term, and then we all got locked inside for 2 years with just our screens. Like, that's what I think really ruined and scrambled a lot of people's heads, including mine. That when you're in front of a person, it's like easier to
Yeah.
see the humanity, but like whenever you're just warring online, everything just gets much more pitched, much more angry. And that I think really, like, because I posted a lot, you posted a lot, like there were a lot of like people who posted a lot during Trump's first term, who kind of like just, I faded away around like 2021. I just was like, okay, I'm spent. I'm completely over
Yep.
this, and I've been more or less offline for the remaining, ever since. And it's, I think a
Let me
lot of people
flesh this,
in my position.
and I think you're right. Let me flesh this out. What I meant by earlier of they cut some of this off too soon. Now, if you look at the early studies of when we got cell phones and we're driving, the distraction rates, the driving while talking rates, the things that went wrong were incredibly high when it first happened. They're like, that's why we're like, hey, don't talk on your phone, go hands free, yada yada yada. If you actually look now, and 10 to 20 years on from when we first started having cell phones, talking while driving on a phone is no longer has the negative, like it actually, it's not perfectly safe. Nothing is perfectly safe while driving, but the incidents related to just talking on your phone, especially hands free or anything like that, are much, much lower because we've adapted our attention to the
Hmm.
technology, to our ability to cope. And to some
Yeah.
degree, we needed to continue to go through a more like, because at least in 2016, you knew you were arguing with a person most of the time, right? In 2016, as this started, you knew you were arguing with your actual neighbor, and because we didn't see it through of like maybe we can get to some sort of resolution somehow, and they're like, okay, let's just make this boring. Like it was abrupt how boring Facebook got. Right.
Hmm.
Right after that moment of like, why am I on? It was not only was I burned out, but there was nothing left on there to want to see particularly. And that
Hmm.
was somewhat intentional. They needed to bring down the heat a little bit. I mean, we aren't Myanmar, but like that happened, right? We can't forget what
Hmm.
happens when you get the level of conversation, ideas going in people's brains, movement towards change, and Facebook. I mean, what it doesn't know what to do. It's just it's a young company just trying to make its money. I'm not saying it's innocent. It's not innocent, but it's not. I don't think Mark Zuckerberg is an intentionally malicious human being. I think he is
No.
a
And,
product of incentives and some level of spectrum.
and so, like, to kind of hammer on the Myanmar point, I mean, like, that was a situation where Facebook dialogue unambiguously contributed to a lot of violence
Yes.
against their Muslim minority in that country. And one of the problems that like Zuckerberg runs into is that there isn't an easy way to make the algorithm friendly. Like, at one point they tried to restrict posts in that area, I think, or like in some analogous
Mm-hmm.
situation, to just like close friends and family, and it didn't make the toxicity go away. It just made it more intense. Uh, there's just something about going online that makes people angry. Like, that's just what it is. If there's an algorithmic way of changing that, especially a way that changes that while simultaneously optimizing somewhat for engagement, because that's what these algorithms need. They need you on their platform for as long as possible, so they are very much um, designed to keep you there, kind of like the Marvel franchise.
And well, yeah, I mean, and to some degree, I think the algorithm obviously evolves as we do because we do build immunities to certain types of videos, to certain types of like what I will continue to scroll on one week and then just be like, nope, I just don't care about this. Quicker off, and like the algorithm learns that, and
Hmm.
I'll see how that changes on Instagram for me of what I'm looking at, what it's trying to feed me, what mistakes it makes by what it thinks I lingered on too long, right? Because it's also an imperfect tool. It doesn't really know what I'm doing. It doesn't really know what I think about anything I viewed, right?
Hmm.
Unless I explicitly wrote, okay, this is the great, and I don't do that, like, because who would, right? So it doesn't know those things; it infers those things, and that slight
Hmm.
inference problem that's always going to have. It's going to get better and better and better, but sometimes just going to be flat wrong, right? It's not you. It doesn't know you. It doesn't know what you thought about anything, and so I don't know. I think we're getting to a very weird place where the reason I think you being in video form is really good is because while AI can do videos, there's still much more noticeable AI person talking videos, right? That
Hmm.
is a way to feel human in a devoid context. And as you say, it makes people angry. Just being online makes people angry. And maybe that's true, but I think what's true about it or why it's true is because it takes context away from interactions. And you don't know what the extra things about what they said. You can't get tone unless they're perfectly good at like all the
Yeah.
things that are not even perfectly good. So in the negative space around the context where you would have given generosity, where you would have given like seen that person smile or smirk or whatever,
Hmm.
you can basically only project negative, right? You're not going to most likely give them the generosity that you probably
Hmm.
should give them. Or you should give them because like you would want it yourself. But I think it takes time for us to learn that again in each context we have to be because the medium is the message. And okay, it's screwing us on context, but we're still using it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and also, I mean, like, as you said, like a lot of the videos have this sort of like really soulless AI voice, which is pretty, you know, alarming to listen to because oftentimes it's like a subject that I want to know. It's like,
Yeah.
very esoteric, things about history or camera science or something like that. But, and I don't register immediately that it's AI. And then about like 5 seconds in, I'm like, oh, wow, this is like an AI voice. Um, and I think what that points to is we're kind of still figuring out kind of like what we'll tolerate, in terms of AI slot because it's here and it's going to be a part of us, and it's going to be a component of how we communicate, moving forward. But again, like you can't fake the human element, but the human element isn't the only option, you know.
No, and so that's an interesting thing about the context of when you want to hear a human's voice, because let's say I use Speechify, right? I like to
Mhm.
hear audio, so I don't mind if they're reading me, a long memo or whatever it is to listen to. Well, now it
Right.
has the option to turn that memo into a podcast. And it turns those into podcasts. Sometimes that's actually useful. Would I publish that? No. But would I take a memo that I'm thinking through a client's problem with, right? Put that into podcast form and listen to it from my notes so that because I'm more auditory, can like get more from it. Yeah. But I don't think, it was like they think at the end, it's like and share. It's like, no, you're using this wrong. I like that it made a more engaging, entertaining version of like a
Hmm.
memo that kind of is boring. And
Yeah.
as long as those
Yes.
things stay there, it's fine. But it's not for public consumption unless I find a
It's
really specific reason.
it's new tech and it's just happening so rapidly. Like it's just really hard. Like we're the first species, like I'm sorry, we're the first generation that has really experienced technological shift like this, right? So there's a lot to just wrap our minds around. Like
Yeah.
here's another shift that really annoys me, which is listening to videos on fast speed. Like,
Ah.
so one of the things that I've noticed is like when I'm on Twitter, a lot of times my video speed seems to be automatically set to 1.25x. So it's just fast enough to speed it up without you immediately being able to clock that you're actually listening to something sped up. And it's been driving me absolutely
Do
crazy. I'm
you
like,
ever
why
speed
is
it up
it?
yourself? Do you ever speed up any
No, but
videos? Okay, see, I do. I
no.
mean, I do because some people are boring. I will go like, I'm
Hmm.
not watching your
Well, yeah,
video.
like
This is
so that's my point is that like it's a natural thing for you. It's not
well,
natural for me. Like there's a kind of like a growing pains that I'm experiencing on that obviously a lot of people
it's
don't.
it's like because if you ever listen to a lot of books or read a lot of books, especially nonfiction, you start realizing like the more you've read of them, the more you're like, okay, there's a lot of stuff that I've heard other places I might not need to hear. They're going to get to an interesting point somewhere in here, but I don't need to like go at the pace that like they're trying to set it. And so,
Mhm.
especially like on Twitter videos that are sort of related to, a topic you understand, but you can tell this guy might have a little bit different point. I don't want to sit through all the preamble of we understand this thing together. I'll hear that quickly, right? But
Mhm.
I want to get to the extra thing. So, but I've just never had it. I've never had it automatically speed up on me that I've noticed. But because I speed it up or slow it down depending on what I want to hear, how important the thing is, or what I think the relative level of care is. You know,
Yeah. Like, oh man. Oh yeah. One of the things about these videos is that if you want your videos, to get a certain amount of reach, they have to be under 3 minutes, right? So a lot of the times I'm cutting things down. You want like a mix. You want some videos longer than 3 minutes, some videos shorter than 3 minutes. Um, and when I start cutting my own videos, I notice that about 40% of what I say is worth cutting.
yeah, that's just deeply the truth. Just deeply the truth, and I'm sure it's the same for me. Most, there was a speechwriter when I took speechwriting class in DC, and he was I'm sure who he wrote for, but what he said about editing was a word from every sentence, a sentence from every paragraph, right? And until you can't remove a word from a sentence to make it cleaner, or a sentence from a paragraph to make it cleaner, then you probably have some more editing to do, right? And I think there are times when I was really adhering to that, I got a little too, we'll call it like Hemingway stupid brief. You need some context sometimes that like
Yeah.
doesn't make the prose amazing, and that bugs me, I guess. But yeah, I think when you're looking at what can be removed, it is a really hard and important process.
Well,
If
I
you
mean,
want that outcome.
it's as you say, like sometimes like the context is really the thing that you want to preserve rather than
Yes.
cut, like because people are intelligent and they have a lot of media literacy these days, like not like literacy, but people are really good at contextualizing what you're trying to say. Oftentimes like the little pauses, the little moments where you just sort of like let the dead space exist, those are more useful, I think, in communicating kind of like the tonality of what I'm saying than the part where then I follow it up and say, here is what I am thinking. Like oftentimes you can kind of, you know when AI can do everything perfectly, what makes us human is all of our flaws, all of the things that make us not perfectly efficient. And that's an important thing, I think, to sort of like preserve as we move forward, and as we're all competing in terms of attention, is that you can't perfectify your way into the future. That's not the way the world is going to work. You have to allow yourself to be human.
Yeah. And being human is so interesting as like what we expect from ourselves, the stories we tell ourselves. I think so. When I was we were in high school together, obviously, and we was doing extemporaneous speaking. And Schaffner was really against canned intros for speeches. And I adopted that for a long time. And then I went to CDE, which was known for canned intros for speeches because they were better delivered. They had more thought behind. Like there's reasons to can what seems impromptu, right? What seems like, and in college, impromptu was the same way. You have stories you have told before. You have examples you have told before. You fit them into frames. And what I find so interesting about where AI is that it does a lot of that for people without some of the hard, like what we think is an impromptu great speech is so little off the cuff. But if we hold ourselves by the standard of everything is unique and special, and if I write, it has to be unique and special, you'll never get anything done. And I think there's
Mhm.
just so little that is truly unique and special. To get to it, you have to kind of go through a lot of rote stuff that you're like, ugh. And AI can write a lot of that because we were just trying to mimic versions of things we didn't care about to communicate at least the base level of something to get to a bigger point.
Mhm.
And it probably hurts our feelings when like you're the person who was really good at like the emails and you had a lot of stuff canned you might not even realize were canned, and now AI makes everyone seem a little bit smarter, even if they're dumber. But it also might allow people to communicate ideas better that they had that you should know as well to make this work, and keep people more on the same page of language. It's
Also, like, we both come from industries where, the sense of what's canned and wrote is pretty alive for a lot of us. In other words, there are a lot of like industry speak things in politics. There's a lot of formulaic things that happen in Hollywood that Hollywood was getting roasted for long before AI ever came out. And what I feel like AI has done for the American people and for the world is it's kind of replicated what it's like to just be in a studio situation where you're surrounded by veterans who all know what you're supposed to do, and therefore, because you have that sort of like group think, that what you're supposed to do kind of like just seeps into everything, and then everybody can sort of say like, wow, you've all got spirit fingers.
Yep.
Like
You,
you're all doing the exact same thing.
I don't want to go back into the Odyssey. That was our last episode. But I mean, just take Nolan, for example. Like, his movies are different, but there's so much the same in every single movie, through threads of ideas, through techniques of shooting. Like, if you had to rebuild your entire framework of movie making every single time you did, and maybe like, I can't think of anyone who has, maybe you can, have really just every single genre was uniquely that genre, did not connect at all to any style that they had used in other genres. I don't know that director. But because I think it's impossible.
Yeah,
you have to use
nothing immediate. I will say, yeah, like, I think you're generally right that, like, yeah, you kind of like, you find a shtick, you find kind of like your beat, things that work for you. The one name that like is actually going to come out of left field is Craig Mazin, the creator of Chernobyl.
Okay.
Also created The Last of Us, which I thought was a pretty distinct work of art from that. He also was the writer on Sheep Detective. So
that, but I didn't ever see it.
Well, I just like, those are three pretty distinct genre, experiences for
Right.
me. That when I saw his name under Sheep Detective in particular, it's like that was funny.
Yeah, I mean, it's you don't reinvent your own wheel every time, and it took me a long time to realize that. You're building your own wheel that works the way you've got it. It'll have pieces of other people. You should improve it. But you trying to start from scratch to be unique every single time is just a fool's errand on some level, on every level. But to get to the great art, you're going to use a lot of, and great things. You're going to use a lot of pieces everybody else has used. It's, and you're going to put them together in a little bit new way, in a way that reflects differently on the pieces, on the whole of whatever you're presenting. Like, and so if I'm writing even in business, none of the words I'm going to say are magic. Maybe it's a little bit better conveying context, or maybe you need to accept that there shouldn't be anything magic about this. It just has to put the calendar event there. It just has to express what's going on. It doesn't have to be amazing prose. And if you were great at that, I'm sorry. If you want to be great at writing emails, you can still do that. I also might say,
also, there's a reason that things become traditional. Like, there's a reason that Hollywood puts a happy ending in every single one of its movies for the most part. Like, it's because audiences like that. And one of the crazy things about AI is that again, it's so recent. Like, we've had the internet for a chunk of time, that people have lived a good chunk of their life online. And so now, if you actually look at the YouTuber Hank Green, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he's enmeshed in this massive controversy right now, because he was using AI not to write his scripts necessarily, but to help him do research. But his audience like really rebelled against him. But you're talking about one of the OG YouTube influencers. So he's been making videos for 20 years. So you can also imagine that if he sounds a little like AI, it's also probably because AI sounds a little bit like him. Like,
yes,
he's helped drive what a YouTube video should be. And so if you get AI to like write you a YouTube video, it's probably pulling some Hank Green YouTube videos and saying, like, well, it should be like this, like, so we're kind of in this weird, chicken or egg question of AI of like, okay, if it sounds like AI, is that because you are lazy and you use AI, or is that because AI just knows that this is the right way to say something?
Right. And there is that root. Honestly, the same thing has been true in music forever, even before AI, right? The way in which we're building new frameworks of sound, it's not that there's a bunch of new songs. It's like they're referencing other things, they're building on other things, and then
Mhm.
eventually you get something new. And we have weird, copyright laws in music, and like that becomes its own question of like what's original. But there's no original like C sharp, really. I mean, you could have an original recording of it. Like there's a couple
Right. Yeah.
recordings,
Yeah.
like what is it? The Dow-Easter Alexis, that like long song, right? No, that was I can't remember which one. No, it's that's Billy Joel. They were talking about it. It's about the ship on Lake Erie. We got real popular a minute ago, but like there's only one recording of that was good. It was the first time. No one can produce those notes again in certain ways. Like there is uniqueness to music. There's not uniqueness to what is written down to describe that music. The individual note may never be replicated again. That person's voice may not be replicated again. You might not have that instrument
Mhm.
again. Like that can never be replicated. But the thing that they're trying to express, 95% is going to be there, right? And what is that worth? To the
Yeah.
next person or to the society or to, how much are we trying to charge for that versus how much we value that 5% of the in-person experience of the live of the only time it sounds like this because it cannot be replicated. Because I don't
And of
think you
course,
can chase those all day.
we're kind of like clinging to the humanity angle of all of this, but there is, of course, as you mentioned, there's a lot of utility in all of this as well, and I think that there's enough kind of like general ick factor to AI that a lot of people I don't think are like completely saying out loud the like
Yeah.
what you just said, like the ways, like the positive ways that AI is helping you. Like, and
And
I would say some of the most creative people that I know are heavily using AI, and they don't feel bad about it at all. And I do think there's a perspective of you shouldn't feel bad about using AI. If this comes naturally to you, if it helps power you up, if it just sort of like solves, a research problem that would have taken you a week is suddenly done in 5 minutes for you, like there's nothing
yeah.
inherently bad about
Well,
that.
here's it. Honestly, like, why should they support it? What they have heard until very recently, where like backing off the claims, is this is going to kill 50% of white collar jobs. This is coming for your job. It's going to replace you. Why in the world, if you haven't started using it to improve parts of your workflow and your life, would you ever support this? And even if you had, you would still say, dang, I like this, but if they're going to kill me in the end, I probably shouldn't want this data center. I probably shouldn't want this LLM, right? And this may be always the battle of technology, but I will also say that this has been some of the worst marketing in like human history. Because in some ways it's been entirely right. Like they had a jailbreak the other day. Like there's things that they predict about AI that have absolutely happened that are big negatives. We're just they haven't had the immediate consequences that we worry about, right? And there's things that are deeply overstated, like the water use. Not all of them are the same. Like the energy use, there's problems there. But why would I support something that the CEO is telling everyone is going to take half the jobs? What's
Well,
rational about that?
like, and Scott Galloway was on Bill Maher this past week, and he made a pretty sizable, like claim, which he said basically like, look, the real issue is that so much of our stock and GDP is tied up in the promise of AI right now, and China just leapt from like an 8% market share to like a 58% market share of US usage of AI in like, half a year. And that's part of the problem is that once you get the LLM out, it's kind of like a lot cheaper to replicate it because you can just use that LLM to train a cheaper LLM.
Mhm.
So we could be looking at like a massive depression that hits once the dominoes start to fall and we start to realize like all of these AI companies are wildly over valued, because right now they're all
Agreed.
basically trying to sort of like win the race, and then they're going to jack up prices the same way that all the tech companies from 2010s, Lyft, Uber, Airbnb, like none of those are cheaper options really anymore than the industries that they purported to replace. That will happen with LLMs. It will be more brutal. They're going to have to bust it down to, I mean, like you've already had it with Fable, right? Like, so I never really seriously used Fable. Now, are you paying for Fable now? Like, what's your
It's
experience
yeah,
there?
it's part of my plan. So they
Mm-hmm.
allow Fable on my Max plan. They just have a limited
Uh-huh.
usage, which is kind of like the earlier version, like
Okay.
any other of them where you could run out. But as long as I'm not like going hog wild in a day, I'm not going to hit it. Like I,
Right. Okay.
and that's it can. But I also think what this should make people think about is efficiency, right? It should be thinking about what do I actually need to get done, right? There's always a tendency once you have more memory you can use to just
Mm-hmm.
expand the architecture without thinking about like the efficiency of the architecture inside the space, right?
Right.
We tend, what is it in economics, it's marginal propensity to consume, but we grow to the space that we have. We spend the income that we grow to on average. Like, so when programmers code, unless there is a reason that they have to be more efficient, they're going to use all the memory they can, right? They're not going to, and that's just been true all the time. And so I don't
Mm-hmm.
know what that change will be, except that LLMs can use other LLMs, which is like humans talking to other humans to some degree of
Mm-hmm.
in the conversation, in the interaction, there is value, right? Now,
Mm-hmm.
this may be pseudo value, but if it can be mined for real value in the real world, then I don't know. We know less about the future than ever. It may be right that 20 years from now, all the sci fi books were correct, but how we get there will look weirder than we can suppose, is my argument, at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right that like fundamentally what AI is doing really is that it's just chipping away at our economy. Like a little efficiency boosts here, little efficiency boosts there are going to just make it that much easier to not have to hire an assistant editor, for instance, or like someone who is a copywriter. Obviously, like there were times in my career where I was paid to transcribe like
Yep.
media. I mean, obviously those jobs are all gone. And like, I think it's like that, like little efficiency gains that just sort of like rewire the economic possibility. Like one of the big ones I think people have talked about is like just general like assistant jobs, like apprenticeships. Like this is going to make like, and more or less has already made the possibility for a professional to not have to hire a full-time assistant the
Mm-hmm.
same way that they used to. And so those kind of like foot in the door jobs where you get hired as an assistant and then you move on to become like the full partner are going to more or less not be an avenue without serious like investment and like inefficiencies baked into these institutions.
And look, I mean, what I'm being paid for and what you will be paid for is the fact that we know things. We're the last generation to still know things, to still know the questions that are asked. There is not a recession for people over 35 who have a college degree and can ask the LLM the right thing if they can use it, who actually know how to think about processes, how humans interact, because so many companies are being handed slop, are being unsure of what to do. And when they hire the 20-year-old or 24-year-old out of college, they also don't know what to do because they don't even know what questions to ask. So the person you need right now to bridge the gap, because we're going to just keep doing more. What I think will be the
Yeah.
savior is we're just going to keep doing more stuff. So there will be new jobs. That has always been true of technology. We're not going to suddenly decide to sit in our corners and die. Right. And that's, I think, partially, we were talking earlier about we have all these negative thoughts, like what can happen, but we don't sit and dwell there because let's just say we live in the infinite universe where both things happen. We're always going to consciously eventually choose to live, right? Like, so while it's important to worry about that bigger things happen than us, I just think that there's something about the nature of humanity, which is it sees the problem And then obviously by observing that problem, it then changes. We do not know what the change looks like as to how
Mm-hmm.
that turns out, but then that change will be observed and cycle repeats, right?
Yeah.
And so we have so little understanding of where this will go. And some people will be right, but I argue that their right will be to some degree luck or just pure unavoidable obviousness.
Well, it's still to me absolutely bonkers that we have not had a real repeat of Pokemon Go, which I think is kind of like the major like moment. Like you remember that? Like I remember I went to Denver for a weekend, and when I came back, in like the span of 3 days, everyone was talking about Pokemon Go, and people were walking around like it was noticeable. It was noticeable in the streets that people had suddenly adopted this new trend, and all of their behaviors had changed. And that to me is kind of like what I'm looking out for. It's like, when is there going to be some massive sort of like social behavioral change, sort of triggered by AI, either culturally or politically or something of that nature, that really just rewrites what it means to be in society and means to be human. Like that is a major question on my mind.
And I think, and this is what I've always said, I'll say this to clients: if you're using it correctly, you should be on the computer less. You should be with people more. AI has a
Mm-hmm.
chance to, if used correctly, to live in the world that is built for it, which is digital, and allow us to communicate the digital and the physical in a way that is more um, harmonic to actually being human. There's no world in which I think that we're just healthier every day by staring at a screen. Like, yes, this will have downsides to the economy, to whatever, but it's not like anyone yearns for the spreadsheet, right? I don't,
Mm-hmm.
you know what I'm saying? Like, and if you do, it's because we've been deeply conditioned into a kind of weird place. I like finance, I like economics, but like, no one, like Darwin, like, as much as you like editing video, there's something unnatural about that too, right? A
Yeah,
friend of mine,
I actually mentioned this on one of my videos. It's like one of the nice things about posting all the time is that like I'm out, like it gets me away from my computer. Like I'm outdoors, talking and thinking to myself, and then like communicating, via social media. I like when people message me, there's more of a tangible actual sense that I'm like living away from my screen, because yeah, I can kind of like get to a place where I'm spending way too much time in front of my computer. And, like one of the things that I'm hoping that all of this powers is, like, and again, like, so like AI isn't a part of my workflow, mostly because like I kind of get too in my head whenever that happens. But obviously I'm using like the automatic, like, text to transcript stuff like that. None of that really was
I mean,
viable pre AI, like
yeah.
these are algorithmic choices that, or algorithmic, or algorithms that are good enough now that they can be part of your workflow. And, those are just sort of very basic mechanics.
I make the LLM. I ask it nicely so it doesn't whatever. But it does most of the online web browser work for me. When I get here in the morning, there are 3 to 4, maybe 5 different sessions, groups up. It has worked through. It has checked clients, their social medias. It has checked their books a little bit, and then it'll give me a report in the morning. And so let's say I want to change something on a website. I'll usually have the LLM change the thing on the website or change the language, but I'll be specific about that because realistically,
Yeah.
what I'm likely to do is fat finger something in a place
Mm-hmm.
more so than the LLM. Is either of us perfect? No. But if I know what needs to be done, I can let a better executor in an environment do it on these very specialized tools.
Yeah. And I would say, like, whatever your thoughts on AI, like if you're not leaning on it for kind of like research, like vast research tools, I think that you're just shooting yourself in the foot. It's just so good at it. And there's nothing really human about just copy pasting all these different things and like analyzing them and compressing them. Like that is all just like very mechanical, not a lot of creativity there type of stuff. So like it's one of those things in the ways that LLMs really can make your life more efficient, like you should use it while you can, because these tools are only going to be available this freely to us for a little while. Like, and that's complicated. Like,
I've gone
things will get
back and
cheaper,
forth
but
on this, honestly.
yeah,
I've gone
it's hard
back
to
and
predict.
forth because yes, there's tons of compute power, but also there's efficiency gains. There is the modeling of all of this is, like one step below chaos theory, I'd argue, right? Like, yes,
Mm-hmm.
because like let's take for example the guy Archibald Leopold something. He was a 24-year-old who had built a fund called Situational Awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Because he'd worked at OpenAI and he did the numbers and the number of data centers you're going to need, the number of the picks and shovels across this enterprise that you're going to need to make it work. And while he may have been right and is probably right in the future, in the short term, after making 400 something percent on all these gains and having a $10 billion or larger than that hedge fund, at 24 with all the leverage, he got taken out last week basically by his prime
Oh.
broker and then sold to a lot of it, not all of it. He still has he has a big Anthropic stake, but got sold to Ken Griffin. Now, there's a lot of mechanics there. Now, maybe he's too far out over his skis, but the market went back up afterwards. So, like, he can be right, and there can people be hunting his trade. He can be wrong in the long term, but still enough people believe it now that it goes up, right? Like, and that's could have been where he was before. So it's not really about the fundamentals of his thesis. We don't know that. But in the short term, because he leveraged up, which meant he needed to get he had more capital borrowed once prices changed, it had to be, a margin call basically is what happened to him. Now, there's somebody who knows that person on the other side of all these trades, right? They
Mm-hmm.
knew his position. They knew the prime brokers, they knew how much, and they knew the price at which he was going to get taken out. And
Yeah.
magically, it goes there. Now, is the AI trade overinflated? Absolutely. But I'm not sure that it wasn't pure mechanics and opportunism of somebody else who could do something with supply and demand in the
Well,
market to get
it's
those
just
prices.
it's so concentrated, like,
Yeah.
and the fact that we've lost any sense of it's bad to collude with government agencies as a business. Like, it's always been kind of happening, but it's just so out in the open now that the way that capital is flowing is just really, really deeply embedding within our defense department, it would seem, as well as
Yeah.
just a couple of these companies. Now, it seems like at least like there's a couple, right? There's a
We're
really
buying
funny
stakes
essay in the New
in
York.
companies.
Yeah, like, okay, so Larry Ellison in the New York Times today, he's talking about how, oh, poor little old me, like, I'm going to be competing against Apple, I'm going to be competing against Amazon, I'm going to be competing against Disney. All of these people have more money than me. Why are you so worried about it? And on a certain level, he's right, but it's just kind of like, yeah, we're kind of down to like, you know, five major institutions in the media landscape.
Yeah. Well, I think
And
what is crazy, a lot of this is that we actually should have bought stakes in these companies, limited stakes years ago. Because of the way we do corporations and public shares, whether the government maybe shouldn't vote or whatever we want to say, but to help because of our tax situation, like they should have handed over shares as a percentage of what to do with for their workers or for the government a long time ago. That then would have been able to be dealt with, to be sold, to be kept up with. But that's the public share of the that isn't going to be personally invested in these companies, right? And it's good we're getting the baby bonds in, because if they're going to make a crazy thing like market cap rule the world of wealth, which again is the simplest and craziest equation ever, number of shares times price, right? That is your market cap. And if you don't have a single share, you've got nothing. And even arguably, if you have a share, it's just a piece of paper, and that has to become money. So if we're going to play the game of wealth allows you to buy things and have power, a percentage of that wealth has to be guaranteed for the public, and without sacrificing the ability to create more wealth, which is if we just tax it, yeah, that's a problem. But taking a cut of the shares that are part of the public trust, like that's maybe that's communism with American characteristics, but that's a better way. That's the opposite of what China does to some. Like, we need to start thinking about, we have a system that needs to take care of people. We don't. The
Yeah,
isms aren't
I mean,
helping us.
I kind of agree. Like, it's hard to say. Like, obviously, the way that we tax is probably going to have to change in an era with such accumulated wealth in these sort of like corporate entities. The one thing I would just caution is that I think is more or less what the European Union did to its companies, and their companies just lost
I
completely
mean,
and utterly to
if you just
America's
look what
companies.
happened, Oracle. Look at what happened to Intel. Intel has just skyrocketed back past all. I mean, it's a little down now, but it's still way near our all-time highs, or way above the years of being a laggard. Right? I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying that if the government's going to back a company, then we should all get a stake. It shouldn't be somebody's president's son buys early because they know the contracts are coming. The Defense Department should have a stake. That should help them have to fund some of this, right? As opposed to our tax dollars. Why are you taking cash, which is fictional anyway, right? The government is handing out its business cards because it is the monopoly printer. It is the federal government is the monopoly printer. Texas, we talked about all that differently, right? So it's irresponsible to put that in the wrong places. It's also irresponsible to the American people, when you're creating a huge other piece of wealth, to deny them cash liquidity in this way, because you're saying, oh, here's all this money from market cap all these people in stock have, but here's this fictional monopoly money we have that backs it up, and it's just weird frameworks. And again, we have to have a version of it. We don't have to have a version of it where monetary cash flow poverty for Americans drives worse and worse short-term economic decisions to a disastrous long-term outcome in many of their lives. And that's what really kills me about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know that I have a strong opinion, because it's ostensibly not a good idea to have the government owning, your companies. It doesn't seem like it's a huge issue yet, but we only kind of just got started in this experiment. Like with Intel, that was the Chips Act, right? Like we got a little bit of this, or was that Trump? Like I actually don't remember.
I mean, they both have done different things. The Chips Act did some stuff, and Trump's Big Beautiful Bill has done things. I get, you said it a second ago. I was going to ask about. Now I lost it, but yeah, it sparked a thought in me about I want to ask you about. But yeah, just keep. It's I don't know. We are living in a world where it was. You said the government shouldn't own businesses, and like I understand that dogma. And like in a lot of ways, I agree. But I think we're all living under unexamined. Like we take these truths to be self-evident. Is like the start of our Declaration of Independence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And self-evident truths are a problem. We all agreed on them, or at least we're saying we agree on them. But over time, what is a self-evident truth gets further and further detached from the logic of it. It gets perverted. And so even the idea of that being self-evident, that government shouldn't own parts of companies, is, there's going to be a exception that proves the rule of all those things.
Well, let me say
useful shorthand for where we might be at a different place now.
The one self-evident truth that I will still defend and say is just self-evidently true is that one of our primary goals should be to diffuse power as much as possible. That is, I think, the kind of like basis for questioning why government should get in and own these companies, because even though the companies are powerful, they're not as powerful as the US government. So having powerful entities, like powerful corporations that are separate from and not interested or invested in the US government, at least ostensibly, is better than having all these institutions nationalized and all run by one giant power, because the more the power is collected in one spot, right, the easier it is to abuse.
Those are two very deep extremes, because I don't think what we're saying is that I'm saying that in a system where you get a corporate charter and the ability to issue stock because of the government, we can't have a neutered government like we have had now. and a percentage which is not a majority percentage, but it goes to the wealth and treasury of the United States and or the people, is probably the best way to do a thing that it allows us to be capitalist. Because,
Yeah, I mean,
right?
I like that's
again,
why
you control it.
I'm
You
not
have
like
to have,
shooting
like,
it down because I understand that in the brass tacks of things, you're kind of picking between a lot of different very abstract models that, don't necessarily lead to the outcome of like
yeah,
more power centralization or, there's enough power centralization at Apple,
yeah.
to maybe say maybe it is as powerful as the US government. Like maybe not
I would
Apple, but
argue.
like I
I
think
would
that
say
you
it
could
might
say
be.
that Anthropic and OpenAI are kind of getting to that place right now where you do start to question like what level of power being concentrated in just like these small companies, because so I'm not trying to say it's definitely a bad idea. It's just that's why my instinctive reaction to your
And
proposal
it's
is skepticism.
and it's not as though the current government or has given us like a lot of faith. Maybe we need to adjust our expectations, but this current version of the government isn't doing its thing this way in the most in like the least corrupt way possible. Again, we have to have some level of faith in one another that we're not all trying to screw everybody. And right now, I think it's hard for a lot of people to believe that, and I would have a
Mm-hmm.
hard time saying that like this is the best version of the way we could do this and this is the best timing. It just might be the only timing. Waiting for the best timing is might never happen, right? It's like you sometimes just got to jump and then deal with the next thing. And so we're gonna, I think,
Yeah.
have to do with that with a lot of these policies. We're gonna have to be like, okay, we're not just gonna totally roll back everything because that's crazy too. So we're gonna have to understand how to adjust them, how to figure out what works from them, what doesn't work from them, and not just reflexivity of no, 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 Trump did this, because some of it's gonna be good, some of it's gonna be bad, some of it we're not even gonna understand the consequences of yet. Like our belief that we know the outcomes of our policies is probably the greatest lie we tell ourselves. So,
I think that one of the things that we need to like have like a 21st century update on are just like what rights do we have, because there's certain rights like the Fourth Amendment, like that has more or less gotten shriveled up by the way our lives live online, right? So it's so easy now to search a totally innocent person. Like this is what John Oliver was talking about, like just how many tools the police have. For instance, like they can just park a truck and search all the cell phones in the area without a court order. Like stuff like that is just sort of like technology basically outracing the original intent of of the Bill of Rights. And I do think that we kind of need to update and clarify like what rights do we have, because if we don't have rights, then we don't have a democracy. And I think that we're kind of teetering on the edge a lot of these areas where we need to kind of like establish like if like we have a right not to get screwed by what's happening at the top of all these institutions.
And this is probably where I'll leave it, but I think the last like Privacy Act was in the 1980s to not let cigarettes be shown on TV. And it's just like, I get you, but why was that a thing we did and never thought again that we should be really regulating? Because it was just, the idea that all regulation is bad. It's a choice not to regulate is a choice, right? And some stuff has to be regulated. Some stuff shouldn't be regulated. Some stuff is regulated better. But arguing for no regulation is usually benefiting somebody. It's not it may benefit everybody, but it's usually benefiting somebody. And specific regulations may also be benefiting somebody more than other people. But in theory, you need it to like balance those interests between like all of us, the people who stand to make money on it, and the thing that needs to be produced in the world, and that's
tough.
I mean,
I will say that we're in a weird place with regulations because so much of the practical aspect of regulating kind of just does not merge well with the reality of our partisan Congress. And so the way we more or less resolved that was we kind of like wrote like a sort of TBD legislation and said, okay, well, we're going to like say that these agencies can regulate now. And then that did kind of create an institution of like a sort of a deep state, not trying to like, not malicious, but like, that just like Trump is now in a position right where he's more or less called the bluff, and the Supreme Court has his back and basically said, like, no, you know, an agency like the EPA cannot just, you know, make up laws. And it's like there's a certain aspect of that that's bad, because obviously so much of what Trump is trying to do is just sort of like wholesale dismantle everything. But it is, I think, worth it to really look at our Congress
Yeah.
and how inept they are, how incapable they are of doing anything, as one of the biggest sources of decline in our general rights. Like,
Well,
we don't like we're not funneling things through the legislative branch and asking questions like, should we be putting flock cameras everywhere through our legislature and debating it? Like, that's the purpose
yes,
of the
there is a piece of
legislature,
that.
and we've
There's a big piece of that, but I do also think that I think you do have to write a lot of TBD for subject matter experts to take the spirit of the law and write the letter of the regulation, right? And I think that we need a better faith situation in that, to where the regulators, because they have to be subject matter experts, we need an EPA who in theory knows and understands both business, the human, like the environment. Like, those people need to be accountable to the outcomes to some degree without feeling as though they do anything wrong, they're completely screwed. There's a piece of that happens. The amount of things that bureaucrats like, man, I'll just get blamed for this. So they just go, nope, whether it's a good idea or not. But I don't need Chuck Grassley as a subject matter expert writing individual regulations, but I do need them asking questions like the flock cameras. I do need them setting a better spirit of the law example. And then when the letter of the regulation is wrong, trying to then become accountable to that, as opposed to just, you're right, the diffuse level of like, they're never going to quit fighting with each other. We have to do something. If we do it's a bad system. And that way, right now, it's
Yeah,
a
I
bad
mean,
system.
like, honestly, the only actual answer is that the regulations have to be simpler if they're going to run through the legislature, you know. And as you say, like, having complex questions like tracking every single chemical that's harmful to us across states is an enormously complex task that doesn't necessarily dovetail easily with what I'm saying. Yeah, those are two contradictory points. I don't know how to reconcile them.
It's just tough. We need a Congress. Like, I've just, like, people talking, I gotta get going, but it's I I think it's great that we get the right to vote and that we have the right to vote, because not because we're going to vote correctly or because we even know why we're voting, but because at the end of the day, even like the satisfaction or dissatisfaction with the system as the whole is just about all we've got. It's a binary choice. There's individual offices we can say, but for most people, if things are going well and the system is working and they're playing a part of it, if they don't vote and it keeps going, that's fine by me. That doesn't really bother me. That doesn't, but if you should know as a politician, you are messing up when everyone's like, I'm getting straight to the polls to kick you out. And doesn't mean they have to be right, but you've made them so upset that like your rational policy reason is not going to fix it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so you have to execute good policy that will over time lead to better results while maintaining a level of trust in without trust, without almost even without nuance with the people, to be like, yes, I think this person's going to keep doing it, because they don't know and they can't know. You can't know everything. That, it's too much on all sides to say that we're accurately measuring every person we're voting for, let alone president. If we think we even have president the best chances, it's just crazy.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. Like, that's what's tough. I mean, that's why it's important to have a democracy, because it's so hard to know public opinion. That, like, having just like a straight up down vote at one point is kind of like the fairest way we know how to kind of like to measure public opinion, because just calling people, cold calling and polling them is not like super accurate.
No, it's not.
Like, it's
It's
tough.
not. And and it has its limits. So I that's kind of where I want to leave it this week, thinking about how we go forward, and we'll clip some of this and put it out, and here we
Yep.
are. So
All right, left to Darwinism.
bye, everybody.